So I think when people come asking about how to fundraise, they'll often come with a very particular question, right? So they'll come and say like, oh, how do I get an intro to this person? Or they'll go like, how much should I raise? And then like 3 months into the process, I'll realize that they like don't understand actually how to fundraise at all. And they like asked one question, but they didn't realize that they should have like asked, wait, how should I raise?
Right.
So probably the place we should just start is just like, how should you think about a fundraise? So yeah, what are the things you want to think about kind of at each stage? So I think the first thing is just that there's a bunch of prep work people don't realize you need to do. Like the core thing you need in order to raise a round like is just a deck. And so like step one of any round is going to just be put together your pitch deck before you do anything else.
Right. I think you mentioned this before, but it might be like step one and then you end up staying in it for a while because like in putting together the deck, it will reflect holes you have in your business, right? Or you'll be like, well, like I remember when we did the first deck, somebody asked us, how are you going to make money? And we were like, well, it's a good question. Actually, let's figure that out. And so that can be very healthy. Like, I think it's actually great to try to raise money early and you'll be forced to basically ask yourself a bunch of very hard questions, right? That they'll ask you for sure.
The first thing you want to think about is just like, how do we get a deck together? How do we get a story together that's going to be convincing to people? And then you are going to need to do a bunch of work to figure out what type of round you're raising, right? Are we raising a Series A? Are we raising a pre-seed? Is it from angels? Is it from other type of folks, right? So there's a bunch of work to figure out who you're going after, what type of round you're raising, and getting these materials together. And then what you want to do is you want to basically get introductions to people who fit those things you defined in that first criteria, right? So this is going to basically look like you've got a very narrow list of people who you think are your top targets because you said these are the ones who are really, really incredible fit. And you're doing everything under your power to get warm introductions to those people. And it's really key that these are warm introductions because these are otherwise just going to totally get caught up in all the noise of all the emails that they're getting. And so you're going to go through this kind of iterative process of talking to people, probably first like friends or hubs or like other people who you know, not even investors, and asking them like, do they know any of the people on your list? And then iterating and getting more and more people to make introductions to other people, and eventually like weaving your way hopefully through to your target list, but also expanding your list over time as you learn. And you're going to start doing these pitches. And so basically what happens is you'll have this deck, you'll send it to someone to make an introduction, they'll pass it on. If the person's interested, they'll book a meeting with you. And so now you have a pitch meeting, which is your first chance to talk to someone who actually wants to invest. And you want to make sure you're talking to the right person. So, if it's an angel investor, that's going to be them. But if it's a VC, it might be a different person from the firm. And so your kind of goal is to work your way through to the person who's actually the decision maker. And that'll probably take several different meetings with them. You're going to start probably with a bunch of really, really terrible pitches. You're going to do a bad job at first. We spend a lot of time like iterating our pitch, which we'll talk a little bit more later about how we actually do that. But it's really, really key that you're not like, this is the pitch and we're going to stick with it. It's actually about like learning what works, and what works is going to be wildly different than what you thought was going to work. Yeah. The thing you're trying to do here is get soft commitments. So this is really key, right? So basically the entire thing is a game of FOMO. The entire point of a round is getting people to feel like, or not the point of the round, but the way the round works is like people feel like, oh my gosh, I'm missing out on this amazing thing. And like, this is about to become the next Facebook. If I don't invest now, I'm not going to be rich. And so the question is, how do you get that flywheel going? Because when you start out, no one's heard of you. You're not going anywhere. No one cares. And so then they're like, well, why don't I just invest in 3 months or like see whether this goes anywhere? And so the thing you're trying to do is create this kind of acceleration over time. And the thing you need to do at the beginning is just get anyone you can get to invest, right? You're just like scrounging around trying to get scraps from like your mom or your cousin or your friend or your uncle or whatever. It's just like, how do we get someone to give us $10,000? Okay, how do we get $50,000? How do we get more and start building that momentum over time? Right. Because it's way easier to get people in later once you've got these early commitments. And then the next thing you want to do is once you've gotten a little bit of traction, you want to think about, do you want a lead? And really you want to do this in the prep stage. Actually, you don't want to do that at this point, but basically you want to think about like, are you going for a round that's going to have a lead? Right. Where a lead is the person who's going to be setting the valuation, probably having the largest investment in the thing, and they're probably going to be like bringing in other people into the round for you as well. Right. And that's a really, really big difference. Is like, all right, if you're raising $1 million, is one person taking $800,000 of that, or is it going to be from like 10 different people? And so we'll talk a little bit more about how do you make those decisions, but if you're going for a lead, the first thing that's going to happen in your round is you get a little bit of traction, but primarily you're trying to just get that to get interest from leads.
Right.
And so you're going to go start now trying to figure out who could lead, because some investors never lead. All they do is they follow.
Right.
And some investors are like, we only take checks that are over this size, and those are the lead investors. And so really your first big benchmark is, can we get a lead if you're doing a lead round? And that person is going to end up essentially setting the valuation.
Right.
And so the early people, you're just saying, it's going to be set by the lead later. And that's good because eventually you might get interest from multiple leads and they can start bidding each other out. But the first question is just like, can we get anyone as a lead to say they're willing to lead this? And if you do, now everything else in the round is going to be way, way easier than if you're just like trying to piece it. Now you start like emailing people and you'll start being able to fill that last little bit of the round very quickly. And then you are going to have more people who want to invest than you've actually got room for, right? So you said you're raising $500,000 and then you've got like $2 million on the table suddenly.
Right.
And so that the first thing is that people will very, very commonly oversubscribe. This isn't something you would expect, but it's like you said you were raising $500,000 and you like oversubscribe to $1 million and you end up raising $1 million. And so there's two different things there. One is you've got to decide like, well, you had $2 million on the table and you're still only taking $1 million. So you're going to cut a bunch of people. And some of them may be people who you took earlier as like soft commitments and you cut them and it's like a little bit awkward. But that's kind of how this just goes. Some of them will cut themselves as like the valuation goes up. You're like, oh, we told them it was probably gonna be 5 million, but it turns out we're raising this at 10. Some of them will drop out. Other people you can squeeze down. You'd be like, oh, well, you wanted to put in 100.
Yep.
Will you put in 50,000, right? And like, suddenly the answer is like, look, I'm really sorry. I really wanted to have you in this round, but like Andreessen just said that they're giving us $1 million. We're squeezing them down to 700 so that we can fit you in. Would you be willing to give us 50? And you know what? They'd rather be in a round with Andreessen than a round without Andreessen and 100. And so everyone wins from that. But you do have to do a little like jigsaw to get those pieces to work. But once you've got these jigsaw pieces kind of sorted out, now you want to lock it down as quickly as possible. Like once you're like, oh, okay, we want to go with these people, then you start sending out the agreements and there's, all sorts of different things. Typically you want to do this type of round on a safe, not a priced round. But there's different things you can do, but like you want to have them sign something and wire that as quickly as possible. And like actually get the money into the bank. And until it's actually signed and actually wired, anything can fall through. I mean, I know people who've gotten term sheets and then, COVID hits or, they have term sheets and then the market shifts or whatever.
Right.
And you can't expect that the money's actually going to come through until it's literally hit your bank account.
Yep. Yeah. I think that's very important.
So when you're trying to get a VC to invest in particular, as opposed to an angel investor or a friend, there's a few different stages that process is going to go through. Typically, you're going to get a first meeting with someone who's not the decision maker, and your goal is to get as quickly as possible to the decision maker who's going to be a partner. But you might start out with a meeting with an associate. If you can get an intro trait, go straight to the partner, that's great. Otherwise, take the meeting with the associate. The goal from that is just to get them excited enough that you get a meeting with the partner. Now you have a meeting with a partner, and they're going to be trying to come to a place where they decide whether or not they're going to bring this to the rest of their team. You want to get them emotionally invested to the point where they can justify this. They're going to feel excited about it, and then you want to give them a reason to justify it to the rest of their team. Now they go through to their team. They're going to have a meeting behind the scenes with them and decide whether or not they're interested in talking. There might be another 2 meetings or something with the partner themselves where they're still making up their mind, but eventually they're going to go to the team. And probably they're going to pull someone else in. They're going to maybe pull in the rest of the partners. And you're going to have a meeting with a bunch of folks on their team where they're going to be really deciding whether or not they want to invest. And they're going to make a final call on whether they're interested. If they're interested in investing, now you switch into the negotiation part of things. They're going to start making an offer. Maybe you've already set a valuation. Maybe you have a lead. Maybe you don't. If you haven't set a valuation, they might make an offer or you can set one. And then they'll give you a term sheet if you're really further down the line. Otherwise, if it's earlier, it might just be you write up a safe based on what you said in an email. But you come to a final agreement, and that isn't the moment to sign. Now you've got an offer on the table, and if you haven't actually set a valuation, you're going to go off and shop this around and talk to other people and see whether you can get a better offer from someone else. And then once you've decided who you want to take in as your lead, you'll actually finalize and sign that. If it's not your lead and they're just another investor, you still want to wait until the round is finalized to make sure that there's someone you want to include. And then you're going to close the round with the actual signature and get the wire.
The process will feel bad the whole time, and then it will feel good and then be done.
Yeah.
Because like by definition, you're trying to raise $1 million or whatever it is, and you'll get a bunch of no's. And then when you get yeses, then you'll also have the money you have, so you'll stop it. And so like if it goes well, it means that for most of it, you've been like struggling and are frustrated. And then it goes well, and then you have like 2 weeks of like oversubscribed and who you're going to pick and all of this. But like, it was a slog to get there, and then you actually just need to get through that because you need to get back to building the business. Right?
It's like that joke about why are your keys always in the last place you look?
Yeah.
Well, you stop once you find
That's
them,
fair.
right?
Yeah,
and it's like, well, why is the good pitch always the last pitch I do? It's like, well, once you get the money, you're good to go.
Yeah, it's worth really, basically going full time on it and thinking about this as the main thing you do when you wake up or you're in the shower. Like, is the deck convincing, right? Are these people actually the best people that I could find, right? And
yeah.
When you really do make a switch to like you have the materials and you start pitching people, and then you'll be updating it, but you've like moved into the process, right? And so if you don't do those things well at first, you like just aren't set up for success.
This point you make about what you think about in the shower actually is probably worth touching on, where one question you'll often run into in your fundraising is like, should we keep working on the company,
right,
or should we be going all in on fundraising? Because it's really tough to do both things simultaneously. On the other hand, you don't want the company to come to a stop. Like Paul Graham has this great article where he's talking about why he thinks you should really only ever be raising when you're raising and not doing anything else. And basically his point is like, when you're fundraising, the thing that you're thinking about in the shower is whether we're going to raise money. And every day you wake up stressed about that thing. Right. And he makes this kind of more broad point about this, which is just like the thing you think about in the shower is actually the thing you make progress on, but you can only think about one thing in the shower. And so you basically want to make sure that like this is going to be all consuming. And so you want to let it be all consuming and like basically pause, right, sprint at this thing, do nothing else, and then wrap it up and move on quickly. Because if you kind of like leave it dripping in the background, it's just like, if you're good at it, it's actually kind of addicting and it's kind of all consuming, and you like should be like thinking about this, and you like are going to be like trying to like keep like fast responsiveness and making sure that you follow up and like hounding people on all these things, and you can't do that and also run a business well. Right. So you want to get in, get it done, and get out of there.
To really do it well or to succeed at the end of it, like, and maybe this captures some of what we're trying to say, like you need a reason to be raising money. Like, you need like, is it that you are trying to go full time on the business, or you need to hire 2 engineers and you just like cannot, it's a desperate need that's on fire, right? And like, if it's not the main thing that's on fire, like, then you shouldn't do it, right? Yeah. And so you both like really need a reason, because you're talking to people and you're right, you've paused all this stuff. And so you need to be telling them like, well, no, this is why. And right. This is why I need it. And this is what I'm going to spend the money on. And then, you yourself need to feel like really authentic, or really like you're going and you're saying, hey, I'm going to really do right by you. Like I'm going to, it's a fair trade. Like you're going to give me money and I'm going to give you equity, but like, here's why I need it. And here's, I really need to care about it, or something like that. You are like, I don't know, that authenticity maybe is as important as the rest of it. It's just like you're there for a reason, basically.
Well, and it's also anytime you raise is always the most expensive money you'll ever raise. And so like, if you don't need money, don't just give away a third of your company for no reason when there's no traction behind it. Wait until you've got some traction. Right. If you can get further without, obviously if the money's going to accelerate you, there's a good reason to get the money, Right. And there's like good questions about how much you raise we'll get into later, but like it is still always going to be the most expensive if your valuation goes up. And so you really should raise when you feel like there's actually something you can use it for. You want to be really, really careful that you don't tell them who the lead is from, because they all know each other. They're all way closer with each other than they are with you. Right. And so you want to make sure that you don't accidentally say, oh, by the way, like we just got an offer from Khosla, because now like Sequoia is going to call up Khosla and they're going to like work together basically to get that price down. Right. But if you say, hey, we've got an offer from a tier 1 venture firm, now people get excited. They'll take the meetings with you. And then ideally you get 2 of them or 3 of them interested. And then they start negotiating, making offers where they're like, oh, we'd love to do it at a $5 million valuation, right? And you have no idea what your valuation should be. Like, right. This is it's just like, by the market. It's completely set by the market, right? And so people will be like, why are you doing a $3 million valuation? And the answer is like, well, someone told us they would be willing to buy the thing for $3 billion.
Exactly.
And there's really no, like at this stage of the company, there's no other justification. It's not based on your revenue. It's not based on how much traction you have. It's really just, what are people willing to pay? And the only way to learn what people are willing to pay is start getting offers. Right. But someone comes to you and you said, oh, we're thinking it'll probably be around $5 million. And then someone comes to you and they say, look, I know you have an offer for $5 million, but we'd love to do it for $7 million. Now you go back to the person one, you say, we'd much, much rather work with you, but we do have an offer on the table for $7 million. And so, I'd really hate for price to be the reason we can't take this. Right. Can you help us out here, right? And then they'll come back to you with $8 million, right? And now you can play them off of each other and you can get to a $10 million valuation, even though you started out thinking it'd be around 5.
Right. And it becomes, I think, just on that a lot less about the core framing thing there is something like, this is out of our hands. Like we're doing this, we're talking to these people, we're trying to make the best decisions for the company and for employees and for all the stakeholders. And so this, like, now we just have to deal with this other thing, sort of, I'm sorry, how do you want us to handle this? And then, you kind of come back and forth. And I think the other thing to add here that I think can be a helpful strategy is, because you don't want to share the lead, you do find people, like, there's a question on what can you do to create this sense of FOMO or speed these things up. And you can make up dates, right? You can say, we're going to close around at this time, and then just ignore it and keep going, right? And people do this. Or you can also try to go get a term sheet from, like, a VC that is not tier 1 or tier 2 or whatever. You just go try to get a term sheet
get
at all.
Any money in the door.
As soon as you have that, you can tell somebody, hey, here's where we are. And then you can start to get the ball rolling, right? But you just need to get over that initial, or really this like long, sort of slow hump of like, when does it feel actually like the power is with you and the thing is closing and they need to get in, versus when does it feel like,
and it's a wild switch, right? Because you've probably spent months with no one being willing to talk to you. Yeah. And then, like, either you get a lead,
everybody wants to talk
or you manage to fill enough from small checks, right? Like when we raised our pre-seed, we just got like, all right, well, we got like $10,000, or we got $50,000. Okay, like the founder of Skype just said he'd give us a third of the round. Like that was the switch. It was like, oh, okay, we've got a third of this filled, and that's like this crazy moment where now you're just like, actually, all the power is in our hands. Right. So you put together a deck, you got a meeting with someone, and now you're there, and you got to figure out what are you actually going to do. And this is hopefully where the bulk of your time is actually going to be spent in the fundraising process. Maybe you spend a week or 2 weeks doing the prep work. If you spend more than that, you're in trouble. And then you start trying to get intros, and you're spending a week or two doing that. And then you get meetings, and you now have probably hundreds of meetings. Maybe if you're really lucky, you only have a few dozen. But the vast majority of people are going to say no, and you're going to do a terrible job at first. That's fine. You only needed a few people to say yes. But you've got to figure out, how do you get that pitch to a place where people actually want to say yes? And the most important thing to understand here is that this does not happen out of the gate. Your first pitches are going to be terrible, right? And so what happens is you come in and you've got a deck that you've put together. You've got a plan about how you're going to pitch it. You're going to do it, and it's probably going to flop. You should just expect that some portion of these are going to flop. You probably need a little bit of just like exposure therapy to get comfortable with this. It really helps if there's someone else there, because like, you can now kind of play off of each other and bounce off of it and bounce back together. Right. Otherwise, it might just be pretty demoralizing. Yeah. But the really, really important thing here is that over time, you need to be improving your pitch. And the only way that happens is if you're paying really, really close attention to what's the investor's reaction as you're talking about things. Because if you just come in, you deliver your pitch, and then you leave, and then they say no, and you don't learn anything, then you're going to have a really, really rough several months. Right. But if you can track where their eyes light up in response to the things you're saying, you can lock those pieces in, and then you can shift the ones that didn't work and see where they dropped off and figure out and troubleshoot, how do you get your pitch to a place where they're actually excited? Because it won't be there when you first start.
Right. Yeah, I think if you do this naturally, if you're just meeting with one person, that's great, and you should be doing this like when you have one-on-ones or something. But the other two really important things to consider are just like looming it, looking at it later, or really, as Ari said, like doing it with your co-founder, and then both of you are on Slack probably at the same time talking. You're like reviewing it after, like this. What matters is the like learning and iterating and getting closer, right? And if you can do that yourself, great. But you often need to either like watch tape or have somebody else who's able to help you, see things that you haven't been able to. So,
and I think you have to almost enjoy that. Yeah. Like you have to find the game in this. I think like one of the reasons that we're so good at pitching is we both like perfecting that narrative, right? Like we were just going back and forth for 5 minutes on like exactly how should we do this one sentence here, and it's like you have to enjoy trying to create a mental model of what they're thinking about in the theory of mind, almost in like what's going to land for them. Right. And if you can do that, then you get this satisfaction out of them responding, right? It's this the kind of this visceral social thing of like, they're getting excited and you get excited because they're getting excited, and kind of everyone gets hyped up together. Like this is something you're really amazing at, is like giving this energy that they feed off of and tracking whether or not they're getting that energy. And if you can figure out how do you turn this into a game where you're tracking this, you're going to have a way better time than if you're just in there. Like, I can come out of a meeting where everything flopped and actually be excited because I know what I need to do better next time. Whereas if you come out of that meeting demoralized because nothing happened, then you're just going to go into this downward spiral. But it's going to be hundreds of no's, right? And so you need to be tracking you need leading indicators, right? You can't just be tracking, did someone invest? You need to be tracking, am I getting better?
Yeah, that's for
sure. Way easier to track.
Yeah.